So after staring at this piece of wood for a few days, I had a vision of the shape I wanted for the final clock, and I wanted to limit the number of cuts I had to make. So I marked out that shape using my longest edge, the blue edge, which meant just 2 cuts. I then marked a centre line because I knew I wanted to turn a tenon on the bottom of this. That centre line also gave me a position for my clock insert, so I marked that out at this stage. Yeah, you can see it there in grey. The other thing I needed to make the base of my tenon and the end square, so I marked that line there to cut off, ready to chuck it up between centres. Whilst the wood's still in one piece, I decide to chase out the clock insert mortise. You can see me here just marking a start and a finish point for my first layout line. That finish point specifically means that as I'm scribing there, I'm not going to over travel and leave a score across my work. Not having done any flat work for a bit, I make a rookie mistake and move my ruler to the inside, so I'm not scribing that line perfectly vertical. But it's not the end of the world, because I did have to expand the entire thing in the end. Here I'm just moving inside that line slightly and establishing where I'm going to make my first cuts, so as to not have to worry about damaging that edge. I'd not got a chisel wide enough, nor would I want to use a single chisel to chase this entire mortise out, so I marked a centre line, which meant I could treat it like 2 mortises, cut one side and then the other. Bit of free advice, guys: if you want to learn how to cut a mortise with a bench chisel, watch Paul Sellers. He really explains it well. But key principles: tilt your chisel back so that the bevel is pointing vertical, and make a defined number of taps. You want to be going down no more than about 1/4 of an inch. 3 good strong taps should get you there, and then move forward about the same amount, and when you get to the end, spin the chisel in reverse. So when you do get to the end, what you don't want to do is lever off your wall and bruise the wood, so keep the chisel nice and vertical going in this time, and then pull back away from the wall until you've got enough room to get your bevel running vertical again, and then you can lever back away from the cut, popping out those chips. I've then flipped the chisel bevel down and just started to flatten off and level that bottom using my my Moore and Wright depth gauge there. I love tools that are 100-year-old or more. I'm then just creeping back by about half the distance at a time until I can drop into that knife wall, neaten up the edges. You see right here, I'm having to literally just sit it into that tiny little bit of knife wall that's left. Lift vertical. I'm looking along the chisel so I can see that we're vertical there. So I did need to clean it out some more, because what I'd not realised is the clock insert was different profile on the back to the front face. So I needed to drill through so I could sit it in the correct orientation. I started with a small pilot hole and then worked my way up through the drill bit sizes until I'd got a nice snug fit on the shaft of the clock insert. You can also see on the surface there 2 holes. They were already in the wood. I think it had been a shelf in a former life, and part of my placement of this was that I hoped to turn those both away. I didn't quite manage it, but that turned out to be lucky as it happens. So anyway, I've just stepped up the drill bit sizes until I find one where I've got a snug fit, but it does clear through okay. And then I can sit it in and check my depth. And what I totally forgot at this stage was that I was going to want to put a back on, so I did need to take the depth down a little more, neaten the edge up. You know, if you don't do much flat work, I really advise you to, because chasing out with a chisel teaches us so much about the way an edge and wood interacts, and then you can, once you've learned grain direction and everything there, it really transfers across to turning. So yeah, this is speeded up here, but I'm making that first awkward cut by eye, and this bandsaw, it's about 10 years older than me, and it's got a bit of flutter that there's not much you can do about. It can't be tuned up any further. I'd managed to follow the line okay anyway, and not wanting to take the fence off the bandsaw, I decided that this next cut could be achieved quite easily with a handsaw. I keep a stack of different TPI handsaws just above the bench, so I grabbed the first one to hand, which was a 12 TPI, and left really quite a nice finish on the cut. Now, trying to stay in the good habit of marking out a knife wall to cut to, I do that, but I've got into ever such a bad habit of marking on the wrong side, so not establishing such a straight entry. This is something I struggle with, is I remember broad strokes, don't always remember minutiae, or at least they take longer to get in. Once I'd parted that off, I had a quick check through it and scratched my head about order of operations, realising that if I didn't plane this edge now, it'd be an awkward edge to plane after I'd turned some of the surface away. I also wouldn't be able to use my finger as a fence. So went to my current favourite plane, which is a 4.5 Stanley that I bought at Maker's Central actually, 2019. I then went to the card scraper because the grain was switching about all over the place, and I also just slightly neatened up the front and sides there, put a tiny little bevel on the back edges because I knew I wasn't going to turn those away. Again, switching between sandpaper, card scraper and plane. Right, this is my first cut into the end there, and this is to make both ends parallel. Already got my centre line marked, so centering these up was really easy. And then I decided just to turn a tenon, and I dithered a bit on tool usage. I often like to use the bidan for establishing tenons, but I wasn't thinking that I was going into square stock, and I'm not entirely sure what this wood is actually. It's probably one of the ones that fall under the banner of mahogany, but it's quite fractious, and as you can see there, I've got quite a bad bit of tear out. I glued it back, and then I decided actually I wanted a smooth transition in, and I wanted a definitive stop. Now I needed to cut myself some blocks to hold it, and after a lot of musing I decided for the drive I wanted to actually go into the recess that I'd made for the clock insert, but then I didn't want to reference off the base of that. I wanted to reference off the flat square surface of the wood. And why do one when you can do two? So I marked up 2 blocks in case I failed with my first one, which I didn't, but the other one came in handy not long after. In fact, I think these have been repurposed for the cup chucks that I used to turn the sphere in the flower video. I was just using something to line that up to the centre before marking it. The old finger depth gauge to give me a clue. and then I went backwards and forwards between a shoulder plane and the chisel and my layout knife to just start establishing those shoulders. There are quicker ways. I could have just cut it with a saw, to be honest, but I was enjoying playing, and I was also quite heavily focused on the filming. That's still something I need to get into the swing of. I'm using a Mortise gauge here just to double check that my square is square, and then to give me that shape on the end of my tenon. And again, I didn't want this to be, it didn't need to be exact, it just needed to fit. I realised that it was going to bottom out, so I cut it down there. My thinking was that the tenon would bite into the sides of the mortise, giving us rotation, but that flat shoulder and the flat work surface would reference keeping the entire thing true. I chucked it up, didn't get a better camera handle than this, I'm afraid, but I turned a tenon to hold it. The other thing I did was to just do a quick pull cut across that shoulder that I'd already created. That made sure that it was true and in reference with the centre we were turning around. I took the nub off, fitted her up, and everything looked alright, so on to the next stage. Time for the base. So I got this piece of elm. I just went at it. Basically, I'd got no real idea other than I wanted it to be as large as I could get out of the blank. The blank had got a bit of a bow, so I trued that up and got a tenon on. And skip ahead, I went for a shape, and I initially just made a dome, and it looked too small. And at this stage I also realised where I'd got the idea for the shape from. This is a picture my mate took in Bulgaria on one of his trips with a bit of urbex. So you can see I went for a little cove in the interim there, and it just looked better. It added a little dimension. Up through the grits until Yorkshire grit came out, and I didn't seal this. I just did a couple of passes with the Yorkshire grit, and it really did bring out the elm beautifully. And I think I just went for the Woodwax 22 as a finish on top of this. The initial dome that I turned just didn't quite sit right. It flowed down singularly from the tower and looked out of balance, and adding this shortened the blank slightly, and it just offset the dimensions of the tower to the base much better. So went in with a force and a bit, as close as I could get. Check my depth. And then fit it up. Just a dry run at this stage. But I decided whilst it was there I might as well sand up that transition a little. So I made my final cut, giving me the shape of the clock, and because I was going to turn wood away, I neatened up that edge with a plane. So I glued my block in, left it overnight. I just heated the top layer up and smoothed it out, took some scraggly bits off and set that up, but it was well and truly attached. I was quite confident that was going to hold, and it did. But the entire process was somewhat daunting. I didn't keep it on the lathe for very long because the lathe started dancing around. I've not got the herald bolted down, and whilst it handles things brilliantly, it did just start getting a little bit of oscillation up on the rubber feet and start moving into the corner, and I almost had to climb under the lathe to switch it off on one occasion. So after I'd established the shape I was looking for, I realised too that an already out of balance piece was going to become really unstable the thinner it got. So eventually, when I was confident I couldn't go any further safely, I moved over to hand tools to develop that shape a little further. So on this next shot you'll see exactly how much it moved about. In fact, you can see I've got my foot on it, just holding it back a little, and I'm stood quite literally as far back from the tool as I can get. All a great learning experience though, of course. I went on and did a little bit of research about methods for holding flat work, and what I could have done is, when I'd got my edges jointed, is match them up with some of the pieces of wood, glued the other two pieces of wood to a backing board which I could have held on a faceplate, and then just using shims, wedge-shaped shims, I could have dropped this in place and I'd have just had a flat, round, balanced item to turn. You learn. And that's the joy of it all, I suppose. Learning something new, being better the next time. Not quite a carving gouge this, more of a pattern maker's gouge, but it was what I had sharpened to hand, and it actually really gave a nice effect. I did go in and do a little sanding, a little brushing with a wire brush, just to blend a few of the harsher transitions. I got it 90% of the way there on the lathe, and did do a little further work once I'd taken it off. I'm really happy with the texture that I got though. It's very similar to some naive African art that I've collected over the years. Even the wood choice, I'm very happy with it altogether. And here you can see my insurance policy, that screw running through into my holding block. Don't think I needed it. There was a little bit of neatening up to do on the surface there, and I made short work of it. Once I got it to where I was happy, I just give it a really good dousing shellac. Really let a couple of coats of that soak in. Whilst it was there, I popped the logo on it. It's a piece I like that much. It got the logo twice. I should have put sanding sealer on first, because getting this hot glue off was a bit of a mare. It nearly didn't have numbers, this clock, but then I decided it needed them, and I pulled out some copper wire from twin and earth cable, and with some fun twisting with long nose pliers and a little bit of soldering work, then some careful tidying up of the solder with a knife and some files, I'm really quite happy with the numbers I produced. Really straightforward. You know, if you ever see anyone throwing out any decent twin and earth cable, just strip it out and have a play. It's worth your while. So you can see there I've chased out a square for a back panel. Got a little chip in the corner there, but easily repaired with some thin CA. Now, once I'd made the back panel for this, it started to move. It's since settled a little, and I believe I could perhaps warm it up and press it completely flat, but it's holding in, and the clock's been sat on our side working and being enjoyed. So yeah, pop some hard wax oil on, because I wanted something durable but that I didn't need to put put lots and lots of coats on. Plenty of the thick CA in the bottom there, and then I pressed it home. Here I'm just drilling for the copper wire, and then I mixed up some 5-minute epoxy, which took considerably longer than 5 minutes because it was quite cold in the workshop. I managed to fit them up and utilise that existing hole on the front for the number 6, which again adds a little bit of charm and works with the angles of the piece. So once they were done, it was just a case of fitting up the clock piece and choosing the hands I wanted on out of the kit I'd got. And there it was, ready to go. And this is where I'm noticing that it's moved slightly.
Ladies and gentlemen.
It fell out there, but it's settled down now, and even with handling it's still on the clock. I may straighten it out and get it perfect one day, but just there, snag a few little items up and then tidy the workshop. It was a particularly dusty wood, this, so I did have a good sweep round and neaten things back up, and it is a tip there actually, it's looking better today. These are some of the shots from the video, and some you didn't see. I really am happy with this piece. There are things I'd do differently if I was to attempt something like this in the future. I'd like to experiment with off-center turning as well. But I hope you've enjoyed this little rundown of how I got to the finished item. It's certainly a little easier to see in detail what I did than in the fast-paced video that we put out for the challenge. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you've enjoyed it, and please check us out on social media and hit those thumbs up.